It's been a while since I did a response video, and that's mostly because there aren't a lot of things I feel I can respond to right now. So instead, I decided to follow up on a request someone made. I was asked a long time ago to do a response to Overly Sarcastic Productions. Now, here's the thing. I don't hate Overly Sarcastic Productions. In fact, I think they're pretty darn entertaining. Red and Blue are the creators of a YouTube channel called Overly Sarcastic Productions, which uses hand-drawn images by Red herself to teach on literature, myths, legends, stories, folklore, and history. Now, while Red mostly covers literature and legends and myths, Blue, her male partner, mostly handles history. 8 times out of 10, they are enjoyable, with very entertaining images to go along with their summarizations of history or stories. I think they can be very engaging. I think they can bring to light some very interesting aspects to history and literature we might not have thought of, and break down some misconceptions that were there that we never really thought about. But the other 2 times, well, Blue has infamously used questionable historical theories and statements that have infuriated both myself and Lark. For example, in his video on Egyptian history, he proposed and supported the "we was Kangs" theory, which is the belief that all Egyptians were black. Ironically, this video has recently become unlisted and was incredibly hard to re-find, as he made a new updated video recently about Egyptian history where he does not bring up this topic at all. But to demonstrate what I mean, here's the clip from his original video.
But before the inevitable cries of, well, see, we don't really know what the Egyptians looked like, so it's totally cool that we make them all white in any given Hollywood production because you don't know that they weren't, I'd like to inform you that we actually do know that a significant portion of the Egyptian population was Nubian, which meant that they looked like this. Christian Bale does not look like this. Nubian society had contact with Egypt as early as 6000 BC. That's more than 3,000 years before the Upper and Lower Kingdoms unified into what we consider the Old Kingdom. 3,000 years, mind you, is one metric Western history, and by 1800 BC in the Middle Kingdom, Nubia had officially been conquered by Egypt and, to a large degree, culturally subsumed. It wasn't until 300 BC that Egypt got Greeked and whiteified. So while we don't know what the original ancient Egyptian population looked like before there was an ancient Egypt, we can make a number of educated guesses as to what the population probably looked like after 3,000 years of regular contact and cultural fusion with these fine folks. Suck it, Hollywood.
So according to his logic, because ancient Egyptians interacted with and eventually forged a society alongside the Nubians, who were black, the ancient Egyptians therefore must have been black themselves, or became black, and would not become more whiteified, as he called it, until the Greeks arrived in 300 BC. But what this ignores is that the Greeks, other Mediterraneans, Middle Easterners, Asians, and other African colonies, tribes, and civilizations all probably had dealings with the Egyptians at various times in history. Egypt was an early example of a possible melting pot, as its unique location and influence led to many societies interacting with and integrating into it. In fact, the Metatron brings this up rather well in a recent video he put out.
Welcome back. The only way to answer this is to make sure that you and I both know what we mean exactly with the word black. And I've noticed that some academics these days love dancing around this one because it's controversial and they don't want to offend anyone. So what do? They say, oh, but the ancient Egyptians didn't have these modern concept of black people and white people. That's a modern construct. So they were neither. That's dodging the question. So let me be 100% crystal clear here. Did the entirety of the population of Egypt, or the majority of the population of Egypt, look like this handsome man? No. The ancient Egyptians were a multi-ethnic African civilization. It was multi-ethnic because of its very geographical position, a connection between Africa, the Mediterranean basin, and Asia, a strategic location on the crossroads of continents. The Egyptian civilization flourished around the Nile River, which was a cultural conduit of civilization. There is diversity in the skin of the Egyptians. Through time and space, the ethnic percentages will differ depending on what area of Egypt and which era. Egypt is not disconnected from the rest of Africa, and it is absolutely imperative to fully appreciate the complexity and connectivity of such a geographical area. However, the ancient Egyptians did acknowledge and recognize the physical differences between them and their neighbors, specifically utilizing skin tone as one of the major distinguishing factors. Look at this image. To the right, you see how the Egyptians represented themselves. The black gentleman is representing a Nubian, basically a member of the very prominent and very powerful and advanced kingdom of Kush, which was south of Egypt, and those are representations of an Asiatic and a Libyan. Of course, it's important to take into consideration the cultural and commercial and religious exchanges that happened between the kingdom of Kush and Egypt. Of course, a certain percentage of Nubians, which will differ depending on which area of Egypt we are talking about, will have lived among the Egyptians. But the Egyptians do represent themselves with this image, with this specific color.
But leaving that aside, it's attitudes like Blue's here that lead to immediate discrimination and false understandings about not only history, but ourselves and our neighbors. Here's an example. In Night at the Museum, actor Randy Malek was given flack at times for playing an Egyptian role despite looking very white. But it turns out his family is actually Egyptian. Yeah, both of his parents were from Egypt, despite him being born in Los Angeles. It's generalizations like this that can hurt people and our understandings of the world. He shows these images floating across the screen of people who have played in roles involving Egypt and how many of them look white. What I find hilarious here is that 4 of these images actually don't look that white to me, implying he thinks that all Egyptians must have been black, which, as I said, is laughable. And like I said, that video has been unlisted as of now and difficult to find, as he's made a re-summarized video instead. But the reason I bring this up now is because it is setting an early precedent for the political biases that sometimes become injected into Blue's work. But it's unfortunately not just Blue. Red is guilty of this as well. In her video on H.P. Lovecraft, a video y'all have asked me to respond to, by the way, in full, and I'm still thinking about whether or not I want to do that, she states over and over how Lovecraft was a racist and xenophobe who used his own biases and prejudices as an influence when constructing some of his monsters or creations, and as a result, his work has aged poorly.
Oh yeah, the racism. So Lovecraft's proper New England breeding was a major source of pride for him, and basically all of his stories have seriously classist and racist themes, with his heroes being well-educated white dudes with no phonetically transcribed accents, and his villains being literally everybody else. This being good old English racism, he cared less about skin color directly and more about breeding overall, so there's a number of white people bad guys too, albeit uneducated, inbred, and poor, but it's no accident a lot of his horror is derived from people crossbreeding with other races. The cops crashed the party and found a large number of very naked cultists dancing around a burning monolith with the statuette on top, surrounded by the extremely dead bodies of all those kidnapped swamp people. Oh, but don't worry, circa 1920s New England readers. I know you want to know the exact ethnic backgrounds and skin color of these cultists before you render moral judgment. Well, don't you worry, Lovecraft has you covered. We've got some Native Americans, some black people, some biracial people, some ethnically ambiguous folk thrown in for flavor, and basically everybody who's definitely not a white people. I won't say Lovecraft got subtler about his deep abiding loathing and terror of anyone with a skin tone darker than Pantone 727, but this is probably the most all-inclusive it ever gets in his writing. Yes, anyway, evidently sunk back under the sea since the island is gone, and Francis wraps up the story by contemplating how now that he knows so much about Cthulhu, it seems likely that his evil death cult is probably going to be gunning for him any day now. Oh no! How will he be able to function in polite society if he's cripplingly paranoid that every not white person he runs into might be trying to— I'm just kidding, it's 1920s rural America, no one will notice. Even though Lovecraft's works haven't aged well at all,
I've got it!
Let's ignore the fact for a moment that Lovecraft has not aged poorly, as his work has been celebrated in literary circles since the 1970s, and even today has had massive impacts on both the world of fiction, religion, philosophy, and other aspects. In fact, there's an entire field of study called Lovecraftian studies that has carried on to this day, and according to the book From the Library of America to the Mountains of Madness, Recent Discourse on H.P. Lovecraft by Stephen Hantke in 2013, his reputation has been improving and gaining the attention of classical publishers and scholarly fans. But again, leaving that aside, let's analyze the double standard Red displays in her video about kaiju. In one of her Trope Talk series about kaiju, and for the record, this video about kaiju that she does, I have a lot of issues with. But what I want to look at here is near the end of her video, when she's talking about the pale monster from Del Toro's video, Pan's Labyrinth. She points out that it was definitely allegory, and how Del Toro stated that this child-eating monster, the pale monster, was symbolic of an oppressive and institutionalized entity, and there's a reason why it's white in color.
The point is, sometimes his monsters are people, and sometimes they're monsters. And when they're monsters, they're usually allegorical. Del Toro went on record stating that the Pale Man, a child-eating antagonist in Pan's Labyrinth, represents institutional evil feeding on the helpless, and outright says it's no coincidence that it's a pale man. Bold.
So, to be clear, Lovecraft is wrong and aging poorly for his xenophobia and racism in creating his monsters and creatures. But Del Toro is bold for making his evil monster an allegory for white men. Do you see the double standard here? She also just has some other really weird takes that aren't so much political bias, but just kind of leave me stumped. Like, for example, in her King Arthur video, she argues how Lancelot, Guinevere, and Arthur could have worked things out with each other if they just accepted a polyamorous relationship.
So the moral of this complex, century-spanning story is, if Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot had all just been honest about their feelings and entered into a mutually supportive romantic relationship, we could have called it a polyamory. Thank you and good night.
Yeah, because that's totally how the Middle Ages worked. You know, kings of the Middle Ages were totally cool with polyamory and the like. That flew over just fine back in the day, totally. Yeah, if only they decided to do that totally common practice of polyamory. What? Now, she might have just been joking, but with all this on top of each other, you're starting to see the issue I take with red and blue alike. Like I said, though, 8 times out of 10, they're entertaining, engaging, even educational. I enjoy a lot of their work, and I'm still subscribed to their channel, for better or worse. I think they can be very fun to watch, and I think that Red's video series on Journey to the West is very fun and entertaining. She does good work, as does Blue. I liked his video on Samurai. I liked his video on the Viking Age. I even liked his video on the Crusade. Surprisingly, it was not very politically charged. It was done very well. But again, the other 2 times out of 10, as I've demonstrated, they can have some serious biases injected into their work that become distracting and off-putting for some. But nowhere is this more outlined than in the clip we're looking at today. Yeah, I know, right? I haven't even gotten to the actual clip we're talking about. But in honesty, we're not analyzing one of Red's full videos here, just the opening portion. See, I want to look at this literal 1.5-minute long opening of Red's video on Robin Hood. Yeah, it's her video about Robin Hood. The opening of this video was literally so shocking and so off the mark in terms of context and relation to Robin Hood, I actually had to pause the video to contemplate if maybe this was all my imagination. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play the full clip for you. Her opening is only 1.5 minutes long. Watch the full clip. I will not pause it. Watch the full thing, and then we'll break it down.
Capitalism sucks. Don't demonetize me, YouTube. But for real, ever since the invention of money, people with too much would rather sit on a big pile of it than use it to do any good, and people with too little would suffer as a result. And since people have this weird habit of correlating wealth with personal worth, a lot of work goes into assigning moral reasons why some people are poor and some people aren't. Poverty always has to be their fault somehow, and wealth has to be deserved by the people who have it. There's no way it could be, I don't know, a highly complex and archaic socio-political system heavily biased against the success of entire demographics while strongly supporting the already wealthy and powerful, producing a vast and powerful system engineered solely for the purposes of making the rich richer and the poor poorer. Nope, that bazillionaire is totally a bootstrapping icon who definitely earned every penny, and that cancer patient with the GoFundMe probably just needs to quit being so lazy and pick up a third job. Now, most people, picking up on my extremely subtle sarcasm, recognize that this is actually a pretty situation, and is at minimum staggeringly unfair, which probably goes a long way towards explaining the extremely long-lasting popularity of Robin Hood, an iconic folkloric and pseudo-historical figure who enacts his own brand of vigilante justice by robbing the rich and using those ill-gotten gains to help out the poor. Robin Hood is the classic chaotic good archetype, a figure devoted to justice and heroism in direct opposition to the laws of the land. And it's really impressive he's managed to stay so popular when literally every governing body on the planet has a vested interest in stopping people from getting those kinds of ideas. And if you think the US is in some special exempted category because we're all about that land of the free and country roads take me home, you might want to know that back in 1953, the Indiana Textbook Commission wanted him banned from schools for promoting communism. Stay humble, America. You've got a lot to be embarrassed about.
Yeah, 1.5 minutes, and we've got a ton of issues, so let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right into it.
Capitalism sucks. Don't demonetize me, YouTube.
Okay, these 2 lines might be the most hilarious parts of the whole opening bit. I mean, where do you even start breaking this down? Firstly, capitalism sucks. Well, regardless of your personal feelings on capitalism, your video is not about capitalism. It's about Robin Hood, who lived in feudal England. Capitalism was not a thing yet. So your little rant about capitalism is bad is completely unrelated to the messages and lore of Robin Hood. Second, you then follow up that line with, "Don't demonetize me, YouTube," which I just find hysterical. You are aware that this is a touchy subject. You are aware of the fact that saying these lines will ruffle feathers, and you are aware that this line is a politically charged one, so you're begging for mercy already from the powers that be, even though the power that be in this case probably has no issue with your statement. In fact, I'd say you'd be in more trouble if you said the inverse. Thirdly, you start by saying capitalism is bad, but then ask capitalism to keep funding you. Yes, you hate capitalism, but you still want to be fed by capitalism. That's why I thought this was a joke at first, Because how do you say that within the same 5 seconds? I hate you, capitalism. I hate the market. Capitalism sucks. I hate basic economical ideals where my work and my wares earn me money. How dare you? It's so awful. But please don't stop giving me money for my work. I really do appreciate you funding my work. I work really hard to make these videos and to make this channel function so that I can make money. But you still suck! And finally, again, I know I already said this before, but I feel it needs to be reiterated. Capitalism has nothing to do with Robin Hood or the politics within the time period and world of Robin Hood. So this tangent is completely unrelated to anything you're going to talk about in this video, and I don't understand why you'd make it.
But for real, ever since the invention of money, people with too much would rather sit on a big pile of it than use it to do any good, and people with too little would suffer as a result.
Question. By virtue of one man having more money than another, how does that actually hurt the one who doesn't have as much? I really don't think you understand how capitalism works, so let me help you break it down. Capitalism is essentially the power of the free market. Every man or woman has the power to determine their own means of making money, choosing a livelihood or an occupation. If a man wants to own a restaurant, he can, and the government does not have the power to stop him. It's hard work, but if that is his choice, he should have the opportunity to do that. The government will not offer him a leg up, but at the same time, the government will not restrict him either. That also means that a man is paid his worth and what he does. If a man chooses to become a doctor, so he goes to school, works hard, opens his own practice, and goes through the proper channels, makes his own business, hires people to work under him, then he should be paid accordingly and pay them accordingly. Capitalism is about capital and power in the hands of the individual or corporate stockholders. Because of this, the individual has the power to determine how charitable they are and how much they give back, which is kind of funny. You see, you say here that all these rich people with lots of money just like to sit on their piles of money and not do anything with it. But I did some research. According to PhilantropyRoundtable.org and their article on Who Gives More, apparently America is not only the most charitable country of all, but also the evil 1%, people who make $394,000 annually or more, give a third of all charitable dollars in the U.S. as of 2015. So those evil rich people who you say just sit on their money and not do anything good with it, they make up a third of all charity dollars in the USA alone. Now, why is that? Likely because, thanks to the free market, these rich 1%ers have the ability to decide how much they give to charity, when they want to give to charity, which charities they want to invest in, and are more willing to give back. As an example, take the YouTuber Mr. Beast, a YouTuber who makes millions of dollars but donates a ton of that money to charities. See, your statement here about the nature of the rich versus the poor ever since the foundation of money is mind-blowingly ignorant, demonstrating a lack of understanding in the capitalist model and ignoring evidence of individuals who do give back to society despite having a great deal. Though I must commend you on your Marxism 101 slogan. Very much the those who have too much and those who have not will never have it at all ideal. Let's move on.
And since people have this weird habit of correlating wealth with personal worth, a lot of work goes into assigning moral reasons why some people are poor and some people aren't. Poverty always has to be their fault somehow, and wealth has to be deserved by the people who have it.
Okay, funny thing is, you're not entirely wrong here because we do correlate worth with wealth quite often, and that is a poor idea. But more often than not, I see this as the opposite of what you're demonstrating. Here, let me try this for an example, just to kind of show you how silly this is. Red. You did not earn your subscribers. You stole them. You cheated the system or inherited them off the backs of your other YouTubers who worked harder than you did, and you're just reaping their profits. I demand you now give me half of your subscribers because I am incapable of doing what you can do. I cannot draw like you can, nor do I have the production quality you do. Therefore, you should share with those less fortunate. Do you not see how this can very easily be turned on its head? But let's ignore that example and try another one. My faithful audience, I challenge you. Provide me with an example of a rich man who is portrayed as morally righteous in media next to a poor man who is portrayed as morally wrong. Name me 5 rich people in modern media, or even older media, rich people who are portrayed as morally righteous because of their wealth, and then show me the poor man who is lazy, apathetic, and morally wrong because he is impoverished. You probably can't name many, but I'll bet you can name many of the opposite. Ebenezer Scrooge being a very obvious example, a morally wicked rich man whose money corrupted him, as opposed to Bob Cratchit, a morally altruistic man who has little. And what was the moral of that story again? Was it that Bob needed to just work harder to become rich like Mr. Scrooge and then he'd be rich too? Morality has nothing to do with wealth. Jesus himself famously said in the Bible, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." He said this because people who make wealth their entire life and ideal often will focus on material things rather than spiritual things. He was not saying all wealthy people earn their money and are morally righteous as a result. He was pointing out the dangers of accumulating too much money and putting your value in it. That's why it's not wrong to be wealthy, but we can't put our value in it. However, there is a verse in the Bible that says, "Those who do not work should not eat," which goes along with the idea that success is often dictated by those who are willing to work for it. Now, does that mean that wealth is a sign of moral altruism? No, but that success is built on the moral understanding that hard work is necessary. No one's going to just give you success on a silver platter because you do nothing to earn it. Quite often, success comes from working hard to earn it. That's my point. All right, next.
There's no way it could be, a highly complex and archaic socio-political system heavily biased against the success of entire demographics while strongly supporting the already wealthy and powerful, producing a vast and powerful system engineered solely for the purposes of making the rich richer and the poor poorer.
Okay, so are you saying capitalism is archaic? It's only really existed for about 200 years, so it's not that old. And what was that you said? You said a lot of that really fast. It's almost like you don't want your audience to really notice all you said, so let's hear that again.
There's no way it could be, a highly complex and archaic socio-political system heavily biased against the success of entire demographics while strongly supporting the already wealthy and powerful, producing a vast and powerful system engineered solely for the purposes of making the rich richer and the poor poorer.
Heavily biased against the success of an entire demographic. So, racism? Classism? What demographic are you talking about? I love that phrasing, though, against an entire demographic, because that's vague enough that you could apply it to any demographic you wanted. I'd like your academic source on that, and built solely for making the rich richer and the poor poorer. That sounds like Marxism speaking. No, capitalism was created as a means so that any man could choose his destiny, that the government had no power to control the individual's life, their job, or their occupation. In fact, there are various examples of individuals who rose up from rags to riches in America who defy this very notion of the poor stay poor and the rich stay rich. Want easy examples? How about Elon Musk? A man who started with little but then rose through hard work and investment into becoming one of the richest men in the world. Want more? Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Andrew Carnegie, Mark Zuckerberg, J.P. Morgan. These are all very wealthy individuals who made their money, and most of them went from very low income or low station to riches. In fact, I know a man who I belovedly call Uncle Bob. He's a very close friend of the family, Bob Wilkes, who started out as a low middle class family whose father had to work 2 jobs. He is now a multimillionaire because he worked hard, invested in the right ways, and took calculated risks to earn his fortune. There are clear examples of people who did earn their money and went from poor to rich. So in no way is it about the rich keeping themselves rich and keeping the poor down. I would love your source for that ideologue, and please don't quote Marx.
Nope, that bazillionaire is totally a bootstrapping icon who definitely earned every penny, and that cancer patient with the GoFundMe probably just needs to quit being so lazy and pick up a 3rd job.
Wow, okay, so, okay, how do I even start? Firstly, the billionaire thing. How do you explain the men I mentioned earlier? Did they not earn their fortune through hard work, investment, and taking risks? You're obviously being sarcastic. How do you explain their success? See, that's the ultimate thing you neglect here. You've convinced yourself of this Marxist idea that rich people only get their wealth off of the suffering of the poor. But in a capitalist ideal economy, sometimes that poor man can become the rich man through their own hard work. To become successful in a capitalist economy, it requires 3 things: hard work, investing in business or stocks, and willingness to incur risk by trying or investing new things. The most successful people in America were ones who did these 3 things. Here's an example. Frederick McKinley Jones, the man who invented the refrigerated truck. Fred started literally working on odd jobs at a Catholic church, but was exposed to mechanics and machines as a boy, so he grew a fascination with automobiles. Taking his fascination for tinkering, he invested his education, time, and energy into engineering, learning how to improve machines and basic tools. Eventually, he was presented the challenge of inventing a truck that could transport perishable goods. He invented a truck with a cooling mechanism to keep the truck cool. That came from his hard work, willingness to invest his time and energy, and knowing the risk of creating a product that might not take off. And yet it did take off. It revolutionized the market. It changed the face of shipping, industry, and transportation of goods. He was a famous and well-off entrepreneur. But I'm sure you'd sarcastically imply he didn't get that from his hard work, business ethics, or investment. You'd say sarcastically that he totally did it all by his bootstraps, implying that he didn't. And here's the best part. He was the first black entrepreneur to earn the award for being a successful inventor of America. What was that about demographics being pushed down again? And then the second part, the cancer patient. Okay, firstly, what person would ever imply a cancer patient needs to just work harder? This straw man you're creating is actually a little inappropriate. The U.S. has systems in place for people with this kind of situation, such as the healthcare system, welfare, and insurance companies. These systems aren't perfect, of course. In fact, you could argue that capitalism itself isn't perfect. We have an imperfect capitalist system, and it doesn't always work the way it should. But I'm talking about in the ideal scenario. And I'm also talking about the reality that sometimes we need to take things as they are and understand what they're meant to be, and how sometimes things work against us, but I'll get to that in a minute. There are things in place to help such people, is my point. But it goes back to what I asked earlier. I'd love to meet the rich asshole who would genuinely tell a cancer patient to just suck it up and get a third job. The person who says that, I think we would all agree, is a cold son of a bitch, and certainly doesn't represent the common outlook. But let me give you another example. When I taught high school seniors, I asked them what they planned to do when they graduated. Some had your generic answers like college, military, or workforce. But at least 4 of my students told me they wanted to declare unemployment and go on welfare like their parents. Now, I laughed and asked them to answer seriously, and they frowned and said, "We are serious." What that showed me is we have literally turned the welfare system from a safety net to catch people hitting hard times, like the cancer patient, into a hammock for people to lounge in so the government can give them money. Now, I personally find this reprehensible, morally wrong, and completely unjust, especially since the money the government gives to these people often comes from tax dollars. But I must ask you, Red, what would you say to this person? Would you tell them this is a bad idea? That they should try to work harder? See, I think the schism between the poor and rich, the privileged and underprivileged, and upper and lower class is a bit more complicated than you and Karl Marx like to make it out to be. What happens when this boy, who said he has no problem going on welfare, looks up at someone like Elon Musk and says, "That's not fair, he has more than me"? What will you tell him? Yeah, see how this whole situation is kind of more complex than you're making it out to be? There genuinely are poor people who expect to be handed success. There are genuinely rich people who earn their fortune. Now, there are, of course, cases of the inverse or the opposite. There are plenty of poor people who worked really hard and tried their best and didn't make it. And there are genuinely rich people who do sit on a mountain of gold Scrooge style and just don't share it. There are Scrooges and Tiny Tims in the world. I don't deny this. But to open a video with Capitalism Sucks and then go on a tangent about Marxist ideologues with just general notions and straw men without respecting the complexities involved in this discussion, it's, like I said, very shocking, and I'd say very inappropriate, because again, that's not what this video is supposed to be about.
Now, most people, picking up on my extremely subtle sarcasm, recognize that this is actually a pretty shit situation, and is at minimum staggeringly unfair, which probably goes a long way towards explaining the extremely long-lasting popularity of Robin Hood.
Yeah, and this is the part where fans of overly sarcastic productions are sure to crawl into the comments and say, "See that? She said it was all sarcasm, she wasn't being serious." And yet she was. See, it doesn't matter if she was making out to be like a joke or not. Her implication is that the rich versus poor schism we see in society is, as she said, at minimum, staggeringly unfair. Her admitting it's sarcasm is a deflection to alleviate the people in the comments who might come out to criticize her. But it won't stop me, because I wasn't born yesterday. Again, if this is how you really feel, Red, then firstly, I demand you distribute your subscribers to other YouTubers who don't have monetization yet. As many of us know, it requires a minimum of 1,000 subscribers to make any kind of profit on YouTube. But here you are, sitting on nearly 2 million subscribers, while there's so many YouTubers out there who try very hard to break 1,000 and just can't do it. Share the wealth. Help out those less fortunate. Otherwise, you're just another person with a mountain of subs who isn't using them to do any good for those who have too little, hurting them in the process. I'm not even asking you to give money. Just give the opportunity for other people to make money. And if you say that's not the same thing, why isn't it? It's your means of making money. You made those subs off of your hard work, which, again, you say doesn't happen. No one actually does make their money or their fortune off of hard work or by going up by their bootstraps. That doesn't happen. And you make money from it. You make money off of your hard work on YouTube. Therefore, what about the people who don't have 1,000 subs and therefore can't make money? Won't you reach out to these poor YouTubers and share your subs with them, or at least donate Patreon points? Or are you just a smog, sitting upon a giant pile of gold, unwilling to help those who can't help themselves? All right, you mentioned Robin Hood, didn't you?
An iconic folkloric and pseudo-historical figure who enacts his own brand of vigilante justice by robbing the rich and using those ill-gotten gains to help out the poor. Robin Hood is the classic chaotic good archetype, a figure devoted to justice and heroism in direct opposition to the laws of the land. And it's really impressive he's managed to stay so popular when literally every governing body on the planet has a vested interest in stopping people from getting those kinds of ideas. And if you think the US is in some special exempted category because we're all about that land of the free and country roads take me home, you might want to know that back in 1953, the Indiana Textbook Commission wanted him banned from schools for promoting communism. Stay humble, America. You've got a lot to be embarrassed about.
Again with the straw man fallacy. Okay, you're assuming we Americans are saying things we never said. But since you want to walk down that road, I'll walk down it with you, singing and dancing the whole way. You're right, it's true that in 1953, the publishing company you mentioned wanted it banned for supporting communism. But what else was going on in 1953? The Red Scare, the fear of communism. At that point in time, everyone and everything was being scrutinized to be a threat to American freedom. I don't see this on an attack on Robin Hood and its values, but just an example of the paranoia at the time from the communism scare in the Cold War era. There was this massive fear at the time that the communists and the Reds were infiltrating American people, infiltrating American ideals, and infiltrating American schools and trying to teach kids to rise up against the government and destroy the American system. So they were trying to get rid of anything that would teach you to rise up against the American system. That was very natural in the Cold War era. Tell me, are we still trying to get rid of it? But congrats, you named one publishing company that wanted to ban the books. What about the others? Were there any other publication companies or any other organizations trying to get rid of Robin Hood at the time? Look, you can wag your finger at America all you want, but let's actually analyze Robin Hood for a moment, okay? Did Robin Hood rob the rich to give to the poor? Well, yes and no, not really. We think he did, but who was his primary target? Who did he really piss off? Prince John and the Kingdom of England. He was standing against the state, the government, not the wealthy, not the well-off, mostly the prince. Why? Was it because Prince John just had too much money and wasn't sharing? Was it because Prince John wasn't using his money properly? No, it was because Prince John was taxing the hell out of England and using the Sheriff of Nottingham, among other authority figures, to assert his authority as an oppressive state and central government. Yeah, standing up and opposing monarchy. Gee, I don't know any other country that's ever done that. But again, this goes back to the point I made earlier. Robin Hood has nothing to do with capitalism. In fact, Robin Hood has very little to do with the unfairness of wealth versus poverty. It had to do with an oppressive government that was taking from its people without their consent and putting their boot down on anyone who stood up to them or argued against it. In fact, Robin Hood, or Robin of Locksley, was supposedly a knight himself, meaning that he had station, status, and wealth himself, but instead chose to fight oppression. So even that doesn't work out well for your argument. I think the reason people like Robin Hood so much is, like you said, someone standing up to oppression regardless of the consequences and identifying the evil in oppressive governments like Prince John is admirable. But note how none of what we've talked about with Robin Hood has to do with capitalism or the accumulation of wealth or why it's wrong. It's not about the evils of capitalism. It's not about the evils of accumulating wealth or about how people who have wealth obviously don't earn it and use that wealth to hurt people below them. John did not use his wealth to hurt England. He used the royal crown. There's a difference. When there is a powerful central government and it goes unchecked, call it monarchy or communist dictatorship, eventually it will become mad with power, and there are countless examples throughout history. Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, the list goes on. And guess what? Want to know what all these men had in common? None of them were capitalists. No, all of them actually spoke out very staunchly against capitalism. Which begs the ultimate question of all. This is the biggest question I have to ask. Why did you make that rant earlier about capitalism and wealth if literally nothing about it has to do with the subject matter you'll be talking about? Because Robin Hood is not about capitalism. Robin Hood lived in a feudalistic society where your worth was determined by your birth. If you were born into a land-owning family, you were well off. If you were born as a serf or a peasant, that was probably where you stayed. The opportunity for moving up in the social ladder was not really a thing. You didn't really do that very often. It might happen, but it was rare. It didn't have anything to do with capitalism. It didn't have anything to do with obtaining wealth and why it's a bad thing. Prince John did not obtain his wealth through capitalistic means. He obtained it through taxation. He obtained it through oppressing the people with governmental power, not capital, governmental power. So if you knew this, why even bring up this argument about capitalism in the first place? You could have easily started off the video by saying, owning wealth is a tricky business, or the rift between poor and rich is a very complicated topic, and then gone into it and it would have been fine. But your opening statement was, capitalism sucks. Why? Why say it? Well, I have a theory. Here's my theory. Because controversy sells, and you wanted to get people buzzing in the comments section to get more money, using what you know the consumer seeks in order to draw them in and turn a profit from their interests. Because you knew that if they heard that, the people who disagree with you will get really upset and run to the comments section to argue with you and say, no, you're wrong. And then the people who do agree with you will run to defend you in the comments section, turning into multiple flame wars across the comments section, backing you up, defending you, or harassing you, but all of it feeding into the YouTube algorithm, thus bringing you more viewers, more subscribers, and more money. That's just a theory, but if it's true, it's a very shrewd business practice. I would almost say it's capitalistic, but that's just me. And I want to reiterate this, guys, before we close out today. I don't hate Overly Sarcastic Productions. Like I said, normally I enjoy them. And that's why, even though people have asked me to address some of their videos, I haven't yet, because I don't really want to. Most of their videos are perfectly fine. It's just they have some really weird takes from time to time. What I wanted to do with this video was basically lay out my biggest problem with Overly Sarcastic Productions as a whole, and it's this. They can do great work most of the time, and I'm actually a fan of their work usually. But there are just a few moments throughout some of their videos where I do notice they insert political bias, sometimes to their own detriment. It can be very distracting, very off-putting, and a little strange to see. The reason I made this video now, though, is because people have pointed out that they want me to respond to it. And after I addressed this video in a previous video where I just mentioned this portion, people asked me to please, please, please look at it. So I finally gave it a look. And that's my response to Overly Sarcastic Productions. So final verdict, I love their channel. And I would advise that you go check it out for yourself and see if you can enjoy it. But just keep your wits about you and think critically rather than just agreeing with everything you hear. Because that's the way you make a difference and the way you become smarter. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.